Hi there, my name is Ms.Julia Mackel, and I am a high school ELA teacher. I'm about to get into my fifth year of teaching high school English, and upon the last few years of teaching and reflection, I discovered that one of my pitfalls and one of my shortcomings as an ELA teacher is taking on the role of an instructor when really I have goals to become more of a facilitator who encourages discussion and student led participation. So, today I wanted to take some time to discuss with all of you how we can implement methods into our own teaching pedagogy to shift from an instructor to a facilitator and stimulate authentic learning and discussions in our ELA classrooms. Now, the first thing I wanted to do was take some time to talk about the difference between being an instructor and being a facilitator. If you're anything like me, you've probably fallen guilty quite a few times of taking over in conversation, taking over in discussion, and really taking on the lecture style of content delivery. While there's nothing wrong with that, it doesn't necessarily encourage the critical thinking and the deep discussion that we so look for in the English classroom. So, I wanted to take some time to talk about how we can differentiate these two different teaching styles between instructor and facilitator. Now, with the instructor position, you're delivering specific content. And this differs a lot from the facilitator role where you're guiding learning without specific content delivery. So, think giving a presentation that is on a PowerPoint similar to this versus creating a classroom environment that's stimulating learning through discussion and exploration. An instructor is typically someone who is expert driven and follows that traditional lecture style, while a facilitator focuses on the learner and acts as a guide for that discussion. Now, as I said earlier, the instructor role usually relies on pedagogy that's rooted in lectures and presentations. And again, while there's nothing wrong with that, um, there isn't necessarily a sense of collaboration or a sense of exploration. As a facilitator, you take on more of that role. While an instructor controls what and how students learn, a facilitator will empower the construction of knowledge and essentially lead students to that self discovery in and of themselves. Finally, an instructor typically uses traditional tests and assignments to assess learning retention. And while that is an excellent source and an excellent tool to determine what students do and do not know, a facilitator will emphasize reflection and self assessment as a component of that assessment of learning and knowledge. So now that we understand what some of those key differences are, I wanted to take some time today to discuss why we should implement facilitation into the ELA classroom, some strategies that we can implement, how we can build a supportive classroom environment to foster facilitation, what your presence as an instructor is and should be in the classroom, how we can overcome certain challenges in making this shift to facilitation, and how we can assess our effectiveness in terms of taking on the role of a facilitator. Now, as a facilitator, as I sort of explained before, you're guiding inquiry and discussion. So, as opposed to pointing out what a student should be learning, students make those connections themselves. And that is through promoting learner centered exploration. Rather than telling students what they should be learning, they find themselves learning the content themselves in an authentic manner. Now, with this, they leverage collaboration and reflection. So, a facilitator influences students to go ahead and take that role as a collaborator. Finally, as a facilitator, your main role is supporting student autonomy. As I've discovered in my time in my master's program at the American College of Education, ensuring that students are taking on a specific and intentional role in their learning is going to encourage them to be much more productive learners and critical thinkers. Now, with supporting student autonomy, students decide what it is that they want to learn and take a more active role in their educational experience. And that is exactly what we want students to build as a skill moving forward. Now, with becoming a facilitator, there are several benefits in the classroom and outside of the classroom. First, students become more engaged, which is never going to be a bad thing. In addition to this, students also take ownership of their own learning. Rather than feeling like learning is something that they have to do, it's something that they enjoy doing. Finally, facilitation encourages critical thinking and deeper understanding, all of which are skills that we encourage for lifelong learning outside of the high school setting. Now, in order to facilitate discussion and deeper learning and to encourage facilitation within the classroom, there are certain methods that we should be implementing as high school English educators. The first is to encourage open ended questioning. So, with this strategy, you're guiding discussions through open ended questions and inviting discourse. With open ended questioning, you're not simply asking students yes or no questions. And while there's nothing wrong with doing that at times, you're not really stemming beyond this idea of I agree or I disagree. With open-ended questioning that encourages thoughtfulness, students are able to dive deeper into their own learning and um, really practice those critical thinking and questioning skills. Now, in addition to this, as educators, we should put a really strong emphasis on peer collaboration and reflection. um, with peer collaboration, you are constructing an understanding together. And when working with others together to create an understanding, you're deepening the engagement with course content. This is so different from standing up in front of a class and telling students what they need to know about Edgar Allan Poe, right? If we're telling students what they should be taking away from the content that they're reading, it's entirely different. We're doing all the work for them versus if they're collaborating to find understandings and identify symbols with one another. They're deepening that engagement with the text, finding more in common between what they're learning and what their goals are, um, as well as gaining just a better understanding of the content that they are working with. One way to encourage peer collaboration is to introduce students to small group discussions, which is such an incredibly effective strategy when trying to facilitate deeper discussion. Um, some models that I enjoy using in my classroom are the think, pair, share format, where first students reflect on their own, then they share with a partner, and then their kind of collaborative understandings are shared with the class. Socratic seminars are also an excellent way to stimulate small group discussions. Usually, if you kind of put an emphasis on, um, you know, grading and making sense of what their roles and responsibilities are in a graded sense, these Socratic seminars prepare students for effective discussion outside of that specific format that can be applied throughout the rest of their educational and personal lives. Um, Now, finally, the last strategy that I would encourage is this idea of practical application and ensuring that students are finding relevance within their own course content and within their learning. A lot of this has to do with letting go and giving students autonomy over their learning and allowing them opportunities to create materials that are meaningful to them. One way that I had this explained to me is this idea of teaching for the student. Rather than trying to get them to meet you in what you want them to gain out of their learning, we're meeting them and working together to ensure that the standards and materials are being met, along with a level of engagement that makes sense to them. If students find something relevant and applicable to their real lives, they're going to be far more engaged and willing to stimulate deeper discussion and deeper learning within that course content. Now, to achieve all of these collaborations and discussions, it's incredibly important for us to build a supportive learning environment. And I wanted to take some time to talk about why and how we can do that. It's so clear that participation rises when students feel connected to what it is that they're learning and connected to one another. So it's important for us as instructors to foster these social connections. And we can do these things through a variety of means, whether it's establishing clear norms for communication to model effective discussion, or creating reflective prompts where students can pull from or share experiences, or even giving off informal experiences for students to learn. Um, I have had experience teaching both in the in person setting as well as being a student within the digital format. And regardless, having opportunities for students to share information about themselves and their experiences unrelated to course content, whether that's through a getting to know you prompt or getting to know you games. These are all excellent ways for students to build bonds and relationships with one another. So when it comes time to talk about course content and to talk about the academic side of things, students are already comfortable having conversations and discussions with one another. Now, another important role for us as instructors shifting into facilitator is to make sure that we're balancing our engagement with students. It can be really, really difficult for us to make this change from being an instructor to becoming a facilitator. So we should aim to enhance student conversations without dominating them. And I know it can be an easy thing to do, especially like as English teachers, we get so excited about oh my gosh, like they're understanding the symbolism behind this important symbol in the Great Gatsby. They're getting the green light, and it's so great to watch these like connections being formed in their brains. But it's so easy for us to get so excited that we start to dominate that conversation. So it's really important for us to know when to take a step back so that students can build agency. And it's important for us to know when to intervene to get students to refocus. Sometimes things start getting a little, there are two ends of the spectrum, right? They either really start to get it and then we dominate, or they're really shifting and veering off focus, and then we are like, oh no, 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 let me just tell you what's going on. So you don't want to fall onto either end of the spectrum or let students just sit in a set base of not understanding or knowing something. So in order to avoid both of these potential outcomes, we want to lean on a few different tools to help us find balance. As I've said before, one of the greatest tools to balance engagement and really know when to work with students versus when to kind of hang back and not dominate is the idea of adding in these open ended prompts, right? I cannot stress this enough and how incredible of a tool this is to stimulate discussion and to really get students to think for themselves. In addition to this, I think sometimes where some of these misunderstandings lie is just with students not quite grasping onto the course content. And maybe it's that they're not being supported as learners, right? So, as ELA teachers, we can use various multimedia tools or other appropriate accommodations to make sure that we are assisting our diverse learners in richer understanding, right? If students aren't quite grasping the course materials, it's our responsibility to expose them to other multimedia tools to help them get there. Um, and doing this as an initial step rather than just, going in and telling them what's right versus what's wrong is how we can best serve our students as facilitators versus instructors. Now, another tool that I would strongly recommend is just giving group roles. So maybe timing small group discussions and intentionally grouping students together, giving them various roles within that group discussion, such as recording participation or recording what was said, is a great way to make sure that students are staying on task. And it's a great way to keep a log of what exactly students were discussing, to help us understand when we should step in. So this allows us to step in really only when necessary. And kind of going along with this tool and with this way to help us find balance in our engagement is just being proximal to students. So as students are working together, walking around, engaging with them during discussion, offering encouragement when they're doing a good job, or maybe redirecting only if necessary, right? With proximity, students are way more likely to stay on task, and they're also more likely to work together and to collaborate effectively. If we're staying proximal to students, we are supporting them in their engagement and in their learning versus taking over and feeding that to them. Similarly, in a digital environment, discussion tools are such a great way to stimulate learning and to serve as a facilitator of learning. If you are being proximal to the discussion and replying or offering timely feedback, and students see that you are actively there to support them, they are going to find such a deeper connection to the work that they're doing. And this is only going to help them in finding these conclusions themselves. And this really sets you up as a strong facilitator of learning. Um, Now, just to sort of wrap things up a bit, it can be very difficult to become a facilitator and to shift away from that identity as an instructor, especially if you've been relying on instruction and presentations and taking on that certain role. It can be really hard to shift into that role of facilitator. And it might have a toll on you in terms of having difficulty letting go of control. So it's important for us to scaffold student autonomy with guided discussion in order to allow students slowly to start taking on that role of being in charge of their learning. And this also allows us to slowly start to let go and to give students that power. Um, Another challenge can be navigating reluctant participation. So, in a discussion based setting where students are taking agency and ownership of their learning, there may be students who are neglecting to participate or they are reluctant to participate. It's in these moments where it's so easy for us as teachers to just jump in and say something and move on. Um, this is where I encourage you to practice your wait time, right? And if students still are being reluctant in participating, that's when some of those tools, such as Think, Pair, Share, or Socratic Seminar, are so helpful in helping to stimulate discussion. Finally, it may be that in the back of your head, you're like, I don't know how I can make time for being a facilitator. I don't know if I can make time for student led discussion. And you think that time constraints may be a challenge. I'm here to let you know that facilitation isn't something that you implement into your lessons. It's something that you design into your teaching practice. You are designing each lesson with facilitation in mind, and you're modeling facilitation for students and modeling discussion tactics for students. And if this really becomes a part of how students learn, they will get there, right? Um, Finally, as a facilitator of learning, it's important for us to be reflective in nature, especially when we're starting to learn how to become facilitators for the first time. It's important for us to reflect on our facilitation practices regularly. It's important for us to leverage student feedback and data in terms of assessments and how they're gaining new understandings and learnings for us to guide our facilitation practices and know when to step in, when to step out, what sorts of activities or learning styles are best suited for students, and this way we can make our adjustments accordingly. Progress is never going to be linear, and it's important that we are teaching to the needs of our students. um, so I just wanted to take some time to thank all of you for listening to how we can become facilitators of learning versus instructors. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below and ask me anything that you may or may not need help with. I wish you all the best of luck in taking on that identity as a facilitator of learning. Thank you guys so much.